Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to my latest live stream. Please type in the chat, let me know you can hear me and where you're watching from. That would be amazing. So this is the 5th live stream in my series where I'm essentially preparing a stamp cast case study for my upcoming contribution to the Cranfield University Accident Investigation Techniques course. Of course, if you are interested in attending that course, please get in touch with Craig Cattle at Cranfield. I have included his name in the description, so you can click on that. Send him a message, say that you see my live stream and you'd like to get involved in the course. And of course, if you do need help and support with CAST, STPA or CAST, you're welcome to contact me via my website. So if you visit Whiteley-Safety.co.uk, this is the homepage. There's a nice big button there that says I need help now. If you click on that, it's essentially sends you to a feedback form. Stick your name and email in there. Tell me what issues you're having, how I could possibly help, and send me a message and I'll set up a call. We can have a conversation. So today's session is essentially a continuation of where we were the other day. So this is the 5th session, and we're going to continue going through the National Transportation Safety Committee final report for the accident that occurred involving a Garuda Indonesia flight GA152 in September 1997. And of course, as I say, if you do have any questions, please stick them in the chat and we'll see where we can get to. So, excuse me, first person to comment, we've got Florian. Hi Florian, great to see you. Thank you for coming along. It's always good to see the support. Okay, of course, Florian, if you've got any questions or if you've got some experience you'd like to contribute, please stick that in the chat and I'll bring it up on screen. So great to have you. Okay, let's get stuck in. So we've got 3 people watching live. Hello, hello, great to see you. I hope in one day I'll get to maybe 5 or 10 people, we'll see. But anyway, let's get stuck into this. So in case you're not aware, this type of air accident report has essentially a standard structure, as most civil air transport investigation reports have, and that's because they're essentially created in accordance with ICAO Annex 13, which essentially gives guidance on how to conduct an investigation and what a standard structure report should be. Now, we've already been through section 1, which is the factual information. If you want to go back and watch that again, please visit live stream number 1 and live stream number 2. I think there's some links in the comments, but if not, I'll add them immediately after this session. Then we've got section 2, which is the analysis done as part of the investigation. We got through all of that in section live stream 3 and then 4. So today we're going to be focusing primarily on section 3 conclusions, section 4 recommendations, and then of course if you've got any questions, comments, concerns or experience you want to share, please type them in the chat and I'll get to them as best that I can. So fantastic. Just before I continue, just a polite reminder, there is about a 30 to 60 second delay between what I speak into the microphone and the photons that go in the camera and how they come out of your computer, out of your mobile phone. So just be mindful of that delay. If you type something, it's going to take a little bit of time for me to see it and then respond to it. So let's get stuck in then. Right. So there we go. Just quickly. So at the end of the last session, we were talking about the ground proximity warning system and also some pilot conversion training. So the crew on board this aircraft, they had received training and certification for the A300-600 and the A300-B4, and they have 2 different cockpit designs, cockpit layouts, human-machine interfaces. And of course there will be some commonality in procedures and things like that, but there may also be some differences which have not been discussed in the report just yet. But we just have to be mindful that the crew were qualified on both of these aircraft types, and there are some questions over whether the differences in human-machine interface might contribute to this type of accident. So just to bring that, tie that back to live stream 4. So there we go. Let's go to conclusions. Let's zoom in on here so you can see it. So this is section 3, conclusions. The first part of that is findings, section 3.1. Now it's important to understand, and it sort of goes without saying, but I need to say it. This investigation was done, back in 1997, 98 onwards. So it's, a good few years ago now. And of course, they haven't used the stamp-based approach, CAST or STPA or anything like that. So as we're going through this, we just have to be mindful that, the context of that investigation and how it's written and some of the observations that I might make, of course, we're looking at it through a different lens. So, of course, we're going to think about and focus on different things. So, my comments are not criticisms of the original investigators or their investigation. I'm just looking at this through the perspective of if we were to apply CAST, STPA stamp today, what are the kind of questions that we would ask, equipped with that capability? So, number one then, the aircraft was certified in accordance with regulations and approved procedures at the time of the occurrence. So, that's, it's a certified aeroplane. But then, being a little bit facetious, so was the 737 Maxes. But we won't talk about that today. The aircraft was structurally intact prior to the initial impact with the tree. The engines were still operating normally at the time of impact. The pilot in command and co-pilot were licensed and qualified for the flight in accordance with regulations at the time of the occurrence. I touched on this yesterday. One of the things I like to do when I'm sort of reviewing these reports and reviewing other sources of information is I like to use colour coding to help me remember not only, key information, but also whether I've included it in my analysis, or in this case, the pilot in command and co-pilot are clear candidates for inclusion in the control structure model, which is a core part of any stamp-based analysis. And I use on this occasion orange highlight to emphasize that they are candidate controllers, but because I've used orange, I'm highlighting that I've included them in my control structure model. Because it's important to try and, give yourself as much sort of support as you can when you're trying to do this, because obviously if you're doing a very complex analysis involving lots of moving parts, your brain's not going to remember everything, so you have to give yourself some breadcrumbs, so to speak. And so in this case, I'm highlighting them because they are controllers, candidate controllers. And in this case, I'm using orange to emphasize to myself that I've included them in my control structure model. Because you may highlight lots of candidates for inclusion in the control structure, and as you learn more about the investigation or learn more about the subject matter you're reading, you've got to make a decision whether they should be in the control structure, they've earned their place, or whether it's just information nice to have, and if you include them in the control structure, it'll just make it too complicated and messy. Because of course you're creating the control structure model for yourself as the analyst and for your team members to work on. But of course, at some point, you're going to have to write it up in a report and present it to an audience. And they're not going to need to know about every single thing that you looked at. They're only going to be interested in the key things. So that's why it's important to keep a track of this and the status of the information. Okay, the operator's pilot conversion training. So the operator is certainly a controller that's going to appear in the control structure. And they have a pilot conversion training program. Now, I'm highlighting them as a candidate controller because, of course, that training program is, it's not just going to be some training materials, a slide pack and an instruction manual. It is a program. So it's perhaps going to have a training organization. It might have a testing and qualification and certification organization. And so I'm highlighting that because I'm probably going to have to dig into that, or at least think about digging into that and talking about it. So that's why I've highlighted it. They recognise that there is a training conversion program from A300-600 to A300B4. So these are two different sort of marks of the same aircraft, if you like, with different human-machine interfaces, as I highlighted earlier on. And it was approved by DGAC, which is a French organisation. They might be relevant for my control structure, but I'm thinking they're probably not. So I'm going to highlight it, but I'm not going to include it. That's why it's yellow. Based on consideration that the pilots who were undergoing the conversion training program at that time have extensive flying experience as A300-600. So having extensive flying experience is important context. Okay, so the ATC radar controller. So they are absolutely going to be in the control structure model, 100%. On duty, was licensed for his assigned position, in accordance with regulations at the time of occurrence. The ATC radar controller on duty's medical examination was overdue. Okay, so medical examination was overdue. So if you're thinking about a control loop around the fitness and health well-being of an individual, of course there's going to be a medical examination. And at this stage it was overdue, but we don't know whether that is, a serious thing or whether it's just part of the administrative process. But if there is evidence that is relevant, then perhaps as part of the investigation, if you were using STAMP, you would add that to the control structure and have a look at, well, who or what controls the medical examination activity and how or why that contributed to the radar controller not being potentially fit for service, or whether they were influenced by that. Now, at the moment, through the investigation report, there's no mention of that, so we don't know whether that is an avenue of inquiry that was officially looked at, because they've not written about it in the report, and there's no apparent evidence as to whether we should, recommend hypothetically that should be explored. So the airport then, so Polonia Airport. Now I'm highlighting that with yellow because clearly the airport itself is not a controller, so to speak. It's not something that makes decisions or has the ability to influence the control process, broadly speaking. But the management of that, the organisation, the leadership of that airport certainly will. So I'm just making that sort of point clear for those that might be interested in that question. Now it was operated with a total number of ATC personnel below the requirement. So there's a question there over the management of that airport and the ATC personnel. And in the investigation report, from what I can recall, that question hasn't really been explored. I don't know why that is. It may be that when we get to the recommendations section, which is on the next page, so section 4 recommendations, maybe there's a recommendation to look at that, but we'll check when we get there. Okay, so the ongoing training for controller, especially in critical situation emergency procedures, was insufficient. So ongoing training. So I'm going to highlight that as a controller that I need to include in my control structure. In fact, actually, whilst I do that, I might do it now. Let me steal one of these boxes, these candidate controller boxes, so I don't forget. So we need a pilot conversion training program. I'll use the American spelling just to keep the audience online. There we go. And also we need some ATC ongoing training program. There we go. Air traffic controller. Ongoing training program, so we'll put that in there as a candidate controller. We could put the medical examination on there just for completeness. There we go, examination process. There we go, let's just change that one there. There we go. That's the ATC medical examination process. We've already got the airport management, but I'll stick that in there now while I'm at it, because I don't want to miss that. I've already got it, but I don't want to miss it, for the purposes of this presentation, this live stream. Airport ATC leadership. There we go. So that's in there. Let's put that there. Ongoing training for the controller. Yeah, we've just highlighted that. So let's change that orange. Especially in critical situation emergency procedures was insufficient. So should I mention those procedures? Yeah, why not? Let's do that. Let's stick that in. So ATC critical situation emergency procedures. There we go. Opposite runway operation was the common practice for takeoff and landing at Polonia Airport, presenting a safety hazard for air traffic operations. So let's just, highlight that. So opposite runway operation. Now, whether it's a safety hazard or not there's a bit of an academic perspective to this, because clearly they can operate takeoff and landing in opposite directions. It's just probably not such a good idea, especially under certain conditions. But there should be, in theory, an ATC airport analysis that covers that situation, and they may have, should have, would have, could have. I'm implying because I don't know, but it's likely, hopefully, that somebody done a safety assessment for that, and the outcome of that safety assessment, because they were operating, was acceptable to somebody. Whether the risk was actually appropriate or not from an independent perspective, perhaps not. And I think that's what this is implying. It probably isn't a good idea to be doing that, but that's how they've presented it. Okay, and again, similar sort of situation. If you've got parallel runways and people are coordinated and taking off at the same time, all it takes is a missed call sign or something for aircraft to collide with each other or something ridiculous like that. Now, I'm not an air traffic control, safety expert by any means. I have got experience in that area, but not in that particular element of air traffic control. But it just doesn't seem like a good idea, especially based when you look at the reasons this accident occurred and some of the contributors. It's probably not a good idea having aircraft taking off in the same direction at the same time. And probably the same for approach and landing. They should be staggered, not parallel, if that makes sense. But that's my opinion. Comment in the chat if you've got any other experience you'd like to share on that. Okay, so the altitude monitoring procedure. So I'm going to stick that in the control structure, maybe. I think I probably am. Let's stick it in. Altitude. I can't spell altitude monitoring procedure of the vectored aircraft applied in the common practice of radar vectoring at Polonia Airport is not required by existing regulations. Is this an ATC procedure? I think that's what it's applying. Of the vectored aircraft applied in the common practice of radar vectoring at Polonia Airport is not required by existing regulations. So does that suggest that there is something missing from the existing regulations? Where's that just gone? Right, ATC altitude monitoring procedure. Yeah, let's stick that up there. There we go. Is not required by existing regulations. So does that suggest that there is a hole in the regulations? Perhaps there should be. So there's a question there. Let's capture that question. Q. Why should the regulations cover ATC regulations? Should the regulations cover altitude monitoring of aircraft radar vectored aircraft? I mean, it sounds like it would be a good idea, so why wouldn't it be in the regulations in the first place? I don't know, it seems interesting. So let's just stick that over there. In fact, let's put it there. There we go, because it's next to the question. Okay, someone's saying something. So Florian says, let's have a look. Where's the... got too many screens open. Right, this one. Where's my mouse? It's here somewhere. There it is. There's one. I found it. There we go. Right. What does this say? So it's slightly off the screen, so I think I'm going to have to read it out when it works. Florian says, I also don't know, but I would assume that switching the direction needs time buffers, safety margins between aeroplanes coming from different directions, and this would be ultimately not efficient for most airports today. Yeah, totally on board with that. Therefore, looking at flight radar and snow on, I never saw that. Thanks, Florian. Fantastic. There we go. Right, so let's keep going. The runway, here we go, this is important. The runway was not closed for landing when visibility was less than 500 metres. So that is one of the big questions, you know, from an airport leadership controller perspective. Why did it make sense not to close the runway, even though they have government regulations suggesting that they may close the runway? It's probably a good idea during that context. So that is a contributory control action, I would say. So let's capture that while we're at it. Let's go. So there we go. So candidate contributory control action. I don't know what the number is, so we'll come up with that later on. So this is the airport. Oh, don't crash on me now, Miro. Come on. Airport. I think it's authority. I think that's the term we used the other day. Airport authority does not cease airport operations when landing does not cease airport landing operations when visibility is less than 800 meters, which it was 500 in this case, or perhaps 400 depending on what source of information you're looking at. There we go. So let's just put that to one side. There we go. So airport authority does not cease airport landing operation when visibility is less than 800 meters. And that leads to a particular hazard, which is it's undefined. I suppose you could say CFIT is the hazard, controlled flight into terrain, but it's a bit of a, well, maybe there's an academic conversation there we can have, and there's probably not enough time today. But when defining hazards as part of any kind of stamp-based analysis, it's not really a straightforward process. It can be quite challenging depending on the subject matter. So I'm not going to go into the details of it, but essentially what you're trying to do is define, what is the system state that leads to a loss. In this case, because, the hazard has occurred and there's been an accident, it is controlled flight into terrain. But of course, operating, whether the airport is open in low visibility conditions could contribute to CFIT, but it could contribute to some other hazards as well. So, we might take time to capture those and think about those. But it's not really essential at this stage. I mean, as I say, this is just a basic, case study. We're not here to do the full thing end to end. Okay, so as compared to the weather minima of 800 meters, as stated in the SCEP version number blah 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 19th of January 1996. So why did they do that? Why did they not close the airport? So let's just capture that. Why did the airport authority not cease operations when visibility was less than 800 meters? Why did it make sense to do that? And again, we're not pointing fingers here. We're not trying to, point fingers and blame people. We're just trying to understand why would it make sense for them to behave that way. Visibility, what was going on? What was the context within which that decision was made? Now, I'm not sort of absolving the fact there may be some, serious issues going on. But of course, we've always got to be open that perhaps there's a genuine reason why they believe they didn't need to close the airport. For whatever fantastical reason, we don't know yet. We don't know. Okay, so the dispatcher. So let's highlight that. I think they may need to go into the control structure, maybe, perhaps. I've captured them earlier on, but... Well, yeah, let's include them. It says that they did not discuss the weather condition at the destination with the flight crew. So you could say, is that a contributory control action? So let's just capture that. Airline dispatcher does not discuss destination airport weather conditions with the flight crew when destination weather is out of limits, trending out of limits, or actually out of limits. So I'm going to make that sort of generic as I can. So I'm not going to specifically say, is that a bit too small on the screen actually? Let me make that a bit bigger. There we go, 18, that's a bit bigger, isn't it? Let's make those 18 as well. There, no, that's a bit too big now. 14, 18, no! No, it doesn't like that. Okay, Miro, come on. Let's just put auto then, fine. Size, auto, there we go. Airline dispatcher does not discuss destination airport weather conditions with the flight crew when destination weather is trending or out of limits. And you'll notice I put double spaces in there. The reason I do that, and you might want to take this on board, the reason I include double spaces whenever I'm writing control actions or unsafe control actions, the double spaces help you to see where the parts of a control action are. So there is a formal specification to an unsafe control action or a contributory control action, and that is broadly, the controller that we're interested in provides a specific control action when, and then a specific context. And the context is what makes that control action unsafe. So whenever we're thinking about, what is an unsafe control action, we have to think about the compound of the control action itself with a specific context. And that context relates to the control process of that controller or of the overall control process for the control structure model that you're creating. And again, it can be quite challenging defining contexts, and it's a common issue that everybody has. And of course, if you've got any questions about that, please feel free to reach out to me. Okay, so the use of same digits on flight numbers, especially for flights in the same area, presented a safety hazard for flight operations. There we go. And just to emphasize that the word hazard, that label for the concept that relates to, is not the same concept when we talk about hazard in STAMP. And that's why I use square brackets all the time, to sort of emphasize whenever you see my work and I use square brackets, I'm using that to remind you that I'm referring to the specific definitions used in the STAMP literature, the STAMP handbook. Because hazard, it can mean many things to many people, as I'm sure you're aware, all the way from, literally anything that has the potential to cause harm, which is a very broad, unhelpful definition. And in fact, it leads to people getting distracted and going down a path that wastes a lot of time and resources and takes it away from actually dealing with proper hazards. And then, of course, there's the specific definition used in STAMP. The approach controller, there we go. So the approach controller, so we've got that one there. Now there is a bit of a question in my mind there that actually, is the ATC radar controller the same as the approach controller? In fact, I'm going to use an arrow. There we go. Let's put an arrow from there to there. Let's make it a straight one. Let's make it that one. Let's make it a bit thinner so it's not so distracting. make it red. There we go. So radar controller, approach controller. Are these the same physical person, or what are they? There we go. Excuse me. Black, right. Yeah, that's right, isn't it? There we go. Fantastic. Right. So the approach controller's instruction for Indonesia 152 to intercept ILS was incomplete, in which the phrase "from the right side" was not mentioned. The complete instruction was transmitted earlier, but with the call sign Merpati 152 instead of Indonesia 152. So there's two issues there. One is the call sign, and then the other is it was incomplete information. Yeah. Okay, the minimum vectoring altitude chart. So I'm going to highlight that as a candidate for inclusion in my control structure model, my draft model, recognizing and enforcing the point again so that the people at the back don't forget. The chart itself, or any kind of document or procedure or training, is not, strictly speaking, a controller, because it doesn't make decisions. You know, it's not an agent that makes decisions and provides control actions. But the reason I include them in my control structure model as a general sort of practice is just to remind myself that those documents, they contain information which may influence the decision making and beliefs of the controller that is using that information. And in the case of a minimum vectoring altitude chart, if that chart is used by the air traffic controller, that will influence their mental model about, you know, where the traffic can go, but also it'll influence their decisions and the control actions they provide. So I like to include them in my working model, but of course when I come to present a model or put it into a report, I wouldn't include those because they're not strictly controllers. So just remember that. Fantastic. So the minimum vectoring altitude chart was published locally by the Polonia Airport Authority. There we go. So that is the formal label for this controller up here. So we've got ATC Airport Leadership. So that should probably be called Polonia Airport Authority. There we go, so let's put that there. The minimum vectoring altitude chart was used by the ATC controller. There we go. So I'm going to stick that minimum vectoring altitude chart. And that influences the air traffic controller. So where are they? Let's put that in there. Used by the ATC controller was inaccurate. So it was inaccurate anyway. Okay, the chart indicated terrain at altitudes approximately 1,000 flipping it below the required chart. Wow, that's it's quite bad. That's not good at all, that. 1,000 feet below the required altitude. Okay, so for it to be so wrong, clearly the investigation, you know, should consider looking at the ATC chart generation, publication and change management organisation, whoever, whatever they are. I know that's a bit of a broad, you know, wide definition, because I don't know, I'm not an expert in this field. If you know a better definition, that could be an airport organisation. It could be a combination of airport personnel and maybe the national air traffic provider or your government regulation, or it could be a private company that's external to the airport who creates the charts. And so, you know, that question of, you know, what is the controller involved in the creation of those charts and the change management of those, that could be a whole sort of branch, maybe even a new part of the investigation. In fact, one of the CAST investigations done by Paul Nelson that's on the MIT website, he talked about, I think it was a Comair accident at Lexington Bluegrass Airport in the US, where the aircraft essentially took off on either a closed runway or a taxiway. And it was, they took off on a runway that was too short, that was it. And the reason was because the chart that describes the layout of the airport didn't contain information about some groundworks that were going on. And so they thought they'd gone on to the main runway, the correct length runway, but in fact they'd stopped short and gone on to the shorter runway, which goes off in a slightly different direction. And they didn't recognise that situation, and that's what sort of set the scene for the accident. And in that case, I think it was Jeppesen charts. There was question over the currency of those charts, and this is the same sort of thing, same sort of topic. Okay, so what else? The flight crew, and they're already in the control structure model, we've already captured them, did not rigorously comply with company SOPs. Okay, I mean, so SOPs, so again, they might be candidates for inclusion, probably not. Company SOPs, so airline company SOPs for management of altitude change. Okay, so maybe the SOP was incorrect, perhaps. I don't think it is, but let's say for arguments there are questions over it. Again, we might have an airline, what did I call it? Airline company SOPs, generation, publication and change management. Maybe that's relevant. I don't think it is, so I'm going to include that anyway, just for the point, and I'll probably take it out because it's not a big deal. Again, like I said, anything to do with all of these documentation and things like that, you shouldn't really include them in the final control structure. But as you're learning the information and you're doing your investigation, it makes sense to include them just as a prompt. That's how I do it. You can choose to do it, by the book if that's what you want to do. But I find, as I'm getting older and trying to remember things, I find it's helpful to include those prompts. And of course, it then means you can give different parts of the control structure to different team members for them to go off and do their investigations and build their own mini control structure for that particular topic. So we've got a few other points. So Florian's saying, once again, proves the power of stamp-based methods. Even though you may not be the expert, you know which questions are relevant. Absolutely, Florian. I mean, this is one of the the funny things, the powerful things about any of the stamp-based approaches. It equips you with the ability to be able to ask questions that are well outside of your technical capability, technical experience. And I've had it many times where people have, I've asked a question or made a statement, and people have said, "Well, how did you know that? How did you possibly know that?" And quite often, more often than not, it's been a case of, "Well, how did you know that? That's classified. That's written down. You shouldn't know that." And it's like, well, I'm just using the method. This method leads me to ask those questions and make those assertions. There's no sort of hiding when you get really good at this. Yeah. Same comment twice. There we go. Thanks, Florian. So yeah, once you get really good at this, once you really embed the mental models and control algorithms, decision making in your brain, you'll become like Neo in the Matrix. You'll see the green code behind everything. It's fantastic. But of course, it means that you can spot things really quickly, and sometimes people might not like that. They might get a little bit upset that you're pointing at things that they might not want people to sort of recognize, or there might be issues that have been put on the too hard pile and forgotten about. And you as a fresh-faced person with fresh eyes, you spot these things, from round corners, and they just get a bit upset that you're pointing at these things. But yeah, that's one of the challenges with this method. But that's what you want. You want a method that can do that. Okay, so the flight crew did not rigorously comply with company SOPs for the management of altitude change. The flight crew deviated from the company FCOM procedures. Right, so let's put that one there. Airline company FCOM procedures. There we go. So I'm going to put airline company SOPs, manuals, procedures, management of change. There we go. Yeah, that'll do. Hang on a minute. Have I just ruined something? I have, haven't I? Let me just undo that. No, that was right, wasn't it? Airline company SOPs generation, publication and change management organisation. And then the ATC chart generation, publication and change management organisation. So they are two organisations. And we have the airline company SOP manuals. And then we have the company FCOM procedures. The ATC one's disappeared, hasn't it? Oh no, it's over there. Altitude monitoring procedure. Yeah, okay. In fact, I'm going to group those together so I don't forget, because this is one of the things, when you use this type of tool, you put something on a page, and then later on, if you start moving things around, you can lose that link in your mind. I'm a very, very visual thinker. That's why I like using these tools. And so just be mindful you don't lose that mental link between what you've just been doing and when you come and change things later on. You don't want to trip yourself up. So the management of altitude change, the flight crew deviated from the company FCOM procedures. So company FCOM procedures that required, when the autopilot is engaged, so there's a bit of context, thinking about the control actions, there's some context. When the autopilot is engaged, pilot flying is to make changes to the autopilot settings and announce his flight mode annunciator. So flight mode annunciator, I think that's the first time I've seen that. So let's flight mode. I can't remember how to spell annunciator. There it is. Annunciator. FMA. Okay, so that might be important. Okay. So there's sort of two control actions there, broadly speaking. You've got the first one, which is make changes to the autopilot settings. And then the second one is and announce his flight mode annunciator. So he might have done the first but not the second, or he might not have done either. And there is a sequence dimension to that as well, because there's always the possibility logically that someone could announce the change but not actually complete the change properly. Okay, so let's have a look. Pilot not flying. So they are definitely in the control structure. To confirm changes made by pilot flying and to announce mode changes on his FMA. So there's two of those. So confirm changes, announce mode changes. So the pilot not flying, to call when approaching assigned altitudes. And they didn't do that, I don't believe. The aircraft turned to the left instead of the right. Instead of right by pilot flying. Even though the instruction was given and was correctly read back by the pilot not flying in radio communication with ATC. The pilot flying instruction to check the cockpit air conditioning had distracted the pilot not flying's attention. And added the crew's workload at a crucial point in time. presumably causing the pilot not flying to not immediately identify that the aircraft was turning to the left instead of the right as instructed by the ATC. The radar return rate on the screen, so radar, that is in the control structure elsewhere, I think. Let's just zoom out, have a look. Oh, we've added there the feedback loop. Radar controller, radar speed 12 RPM, 12 seconds. So we've not actually included the radar as a specific sensor. And that's, in fact, that's a good point, actually. So one of the questions is a radar a sensor or is it a controller? It kind of depends how you as the analyst or the modeler want to include it in your control structure. So you could just treat it as sensory feedback from the control process, or you could treat it as a explicit sensor. But you could also treat it as a pseudo controller in the case where you can change the settings of the the radar. I don't think it's mentioned in this case, but some radars you can turn different settings on and off. So there is a control algorithm of some description in terms of what type of behavior that radar might have. But again, ideally you should just treat it as a sensor, but it depends if it's relevant to your investigation. You know, if there's an issue with the radar, you might want to look into it. Model it explicitly and add detail. So let's have a look. So radar. The radar return rate on the screen, which was at 12 seconds interval, is sufficient for en route air traffic control, but insufficient for approach. Okay, so let's have a look. Polonia Airport Authority. Why was the radar with, what did we say? It was 12-second interval. Can you see that? Okay, let me zoom in. Why was this radar with 5 RPM, 12-second interval in use for use in this type of radar vectoring air traffic control? There we go. So put that there. Okay, the approach controller. Let's just check that. Approach controller, radar controller, approach controller. So the same name. Is it the same person? Did not issue position updates to the crew when the flight track appeared to be near an obstacle and outside the localizer vectoring footprint boundary. So let's... Oh, no, not that one. Let's put another contributory control action there. ATC approach controller does not provide position updates to flight crew when track near to obstacles or outside the localizer vectoring footprint boundary. So ATC on approach does not provide position updates to flight crew when track near to obstacles, flight track near to obstacles, or outside the localizer vectoring footprint boundary. So why is that? Okay, right, let's have a look. The approach controller did not react as the transponder mode C returns on his radar screen indicated that the aircraft had descended below 2,000 feet altitude. So let's document that one. ATC approach controller does not... well, what is the reaction? What do they need to do? Does not provide TVC reaction when transponder mode C returns indicate aircraft below 2,000 feet altitude. So ATC approach control does not provide TVC reaction, because I don't know what that reaction is. Presumably it's, I don't know, get on the radio, climb, pull up, I don't know. When transponder mode C returns indicate aircraft below 2,000 feet altitude. So when it says transponder mode C returns, I'm presuming, and I could be talking nonsense, so please correct me in the chat, it's the information from the aircraft that is transmitted to the secondary surveillance radar, and then that information appears on the radar, the ATC controller's workstation radar screen. So, you know, Flight Radar 24 on the app or the website shows information about altitude and track and speed and all that stuff. That is transponder derived information. I think that's how it works. So why didn't they do that as well? The standard procedure did not require the controller to react on the well, that's why then. That explains why. So they did not provide TVC reaction because they're not required to. So is that an issue? Is that a problem for the controller? They didn't do what they should have done because they weren't told to do it? So the standard procedure did not require the controller to react during vectoring. Okay, so standard procedure, where is it? ATC, minimum vectoring altitude chart, monitoring procedure, emergency procedures. Let's put that over here as well. There we go. Flight mode annunciator. So, emergency procedures, vectoring chart, altitude monitoring procedure. I think that's related to this, isn't it? Yeah, I think it is. Okay. The conversion training program for the pilot in command was a modified version, while the co-pilot received a standard training program. Okay, so that, you see, that's interesting. So I think we're going to have to think about that, add that to the control structure. So we've got a pilot conversion training program, and we've also got a pilot standard training program. Yeah, okay. So the pilot in command. Pilot in command is there and there. Right, let's steal this arrow. There we go. So pilot in command received the modified version. Conversion. And the co-pilot received a standard training program. Interesting. Why was that then? And does it matter? Does that matter? Potentially contribution. Yeah, so there was a lack of situational awareness. Everyone's, hot topic. What does situational awareness actually mean? Of the pilot flying regarding the aircraft's position. and projected flight path, which started from the initial radar vector. So when we talk about lack of situational awareness, it's what we're sort of hinting at is there are issues with the mental model, the process model, the beliefs of that particular controller. So in this case, it's the pilot in command, the pilot flying, who was the pilot in command at the time. The flight crew's focused attention on horizontal position may have degraded their altitude awareness. So again, that's human factors aspects, distraction, focused attention. The aircraft did not capture 2,000 feet altitude for reasons that could not be determined. So if you watch the last Livestream 5, we did talk a bit about the control loop for the GPWS ground proximity warning system, but also the autopilot flight control system. And I think there was sufficient questions over the behaviour of that might have warranted, with hindsight, knowing what we know with stamp and cast, might have suggested a more detailed investigation of that, instead of being given the line, the probability of that scenario is 1 to the minus 10 or whatever ridiculously small failure rate number it is. Because there may have been a systematic design issue with the design of that system, which is what is hinted at from looking at it through the lens of a control loop. But of course we don't have enough technical detail in this report to really look at that in a lot of detail. Okay, so the most probable cause for the autopilot did not capture 2,000 feet altitude is incorrect altitude setting. So that is a control action from the pilot in command or the person interacting with the aircraft. An autopilot malfunction is possible but not probable. Okay, so I think what we should do is consideration should be given to the control loop for the autopilot and how a contributory control action might occur. We touched on this last time on Tuesday, so if you want to go back and watch that replay again, you can do. It's quite interesting actually. I think there's potentially a missed opportunity there to look in a bit more detail. But of course, we're saying this with hindsight, but also we haven't seen the detail of what these investigators did that's behind this investigation report, because they're not going to publish everything. They'll publish enough to show what they've found, but they're not necessarily going to publish everything that's not relevant or irrelevant. You know what I mean? So I could be asking questions that are answered, but just not in the official investigation report. There we go. So the FDR, the flight data recorder. Again, I could include that in the control loop as a sensor, providing information to the investigators, but I probably won't. It's not really that important. The FDR recorded that the GPS warning bit was on for 5 samples. So that could be considered a control action or a feedback perhaps. Given the sampling rate, the duration of this warning was between 4 and 6 seconds. There was no evidence on the CVR recording that a GPS oil warning was produced before the aircraft's initial impact with the tree for reasons that could not be determined. So that is certainly prime for consideration, should be given for the GPWS and how There we go. There is obviously a question, academic question there over, well, Simon, is a GPWS oral warning, is that a control action? Well, it's kind of 6 of one and half a dozen of the other. If you want to do a good analysis of the design of a GPWS, you'd treat it as a contributory control action or an unsafe control action if you're doing an STPA. So the GPS does not provide oral or visual warning when certain context is met. And you would explore the control loop for that and identify the causal scenarios that lead to that. Now, of course, if you treat it like a feedback, that is a contributor causal scenario of the human operator not providing the control actions that they're supposed to. So you would identify the contribution, but it makes sense to analyse it as though it is a contributory control action. If that makes sense, it's kind of 6 of one and half a dozen of the other. So then the operational check of the GPWS was performed on the last A check and C check. It could not be verified whether the functional check was performed during the last C check. Okay. Both checks are included in the MSI. What is an MSI, everybody? MSI, maintenance specification item. There we go, that's what that is. So both checks are included in the maintenance specification, whatever it was. Right, so there is a question there over what is the control structure for providing the GPWS operational check, and why could it not be verified that the check was performed during the last C check? So that's something you could explore with a control structure model. There isn't enough information in this investigation report to really talk about that, other than to say, here's a GPWS that needs checking. What is the control of the maintainer, maintenance group, maintenance organisation that provides that functional check? What or how is that documented or captured? So what is the documentation system or the way that they keep track of these things? Because this could be a one-off for this one thing, but it could also be a maintenance issue that doesn't just affect these kind of checks, but other more serious checks. If there is more serious checks, other checks as well. So one of the recommendations I'd argue should be, let's go and have a look at the maintenance organisation. Let's have a look at how this check was not verified. Is it just a documentation issue, or is there a wider systemic issue here? Okay, so that's sort of all of that stuff. The probable cause then, so just before I go into that, let's just hold that for a second. Given all of the things we've done in the last 4 and that now 5th live stream, and building bits of control structures, we're going to draw them together after this. But I'm hoping you can see that the approach to doing a stamp-based analysis and thinking about things through the lens of a control loop and a control structure, a jigsaw piece and a jigsaw, can really open up the creative thinking and identifying questions that you wouldn't normally think to ask. I'm hoping that's sort of apparent. But also I'm hoping that as we've gone through this, you've started to see hints that there are actually many causes, contributory control actions, causal scenarios in this particular accident, this particular case study. And I'm going to resist using the term causal factor, because that has very specific meaning in certain domains, certain industries. And it's one of the reasons why in the stamp-based approaches they use the term causal scenario, because it can mean it can mean one thing, literally there's a mechanical failure and it's the end of the world, but it could also be things that have dangerous successors. The system has behaved as designed, and that has contributed to an accident. So let's have a look at the probable cause and see if, this is one paragraph. So let's see what it says. Let's hope, fingers crossed, it's not pilot, it's their fault, boom, investigation complete. So let's have a look. So there was confusion regarding turning direction of left turn instead of right turn. Okay, great, fantastic. At a critical position during radar vectoring, that reduced the flight crew's vertical awareness while they were concentrating on the aircraft's lateral changes. These caused the aircraft to continue descending below the assigned altitude and hit treetops at 1,550 feet above mean sea level. Okay. So that is, in terms of time and proximity to the, everyone being killed and the aircraft being completely destroyed, in terms of time proximity, you can't really argue that there are not issues or questions over the behaviour of the crew, but there are also questions over the behaviour and design of the aircraft in terms of, the way that the automation works, the way that the displays and human-machine interface works. When you then step back even further in time and start thinking of through the lens of a control structure model, you've then got the air traffic control contribution. You've got the contribution from airport management and their decision for the airport to be open. I'm not going to say stay open, because that presumes that they questioned whether it should be open or not. And we don't know that to be true. Maybe they didn't even think about it. It's just we must operate. Maybe they were not aware or didn't consider the limitations due to the smoke. Now, of course, that's probably not the case, and I'm being a bit facetious in that, but I'm hoping as you start to think about the broader context of the control structure, there are many other things in there, contributors that can have a bigger contribution than others. So that's interesting. That's interesting. Okay, so there's no mention of the automation, the autopilot or anything like that. That's not discussed, and I can appreciate how challenging it is trying to draw conclusions and say, well, it's this probable cause and then these other contributors. I know that's a difficult thing to do. So as I say, I'm not criticising the investigators and their report. I'm just hoping you understand that there is a bigger picture at play here. There is a whole control structure around this aircraft that conspired to put it in the dangerous situation it was in. And that's not blaming individuals. We're looking at the whole thing. Okay, so are there any questions on that? Looking at the chat, are there any questions about what we've done so far today or the previous sessions? And while you're thinking about that and busily typing, I'm just going to have a quick drink. And it's fantastic to have 4 people on at once. Fantastic. Please, if you haven't already, comment below, let me know where you're watching from, and whether you've got some refreshments and some snacks to make the whole experience better. So everyone's either furiously tapping away or eating their food, whatever they're doing. So let's now move on to the final sort of section. So this is recommendations. Recommendations. It is recommended that appropriate authorities reinforce the implementation of existing SOPs for the flight crew. So basically make sure the crew are, know what the SOPs are. Okay, kind of standard. Pardon me. Ensure that dispatching and flight release shall be performed in accordance with applicable sections of Subpart U CASR 121. So I'm assuming that's regulations. So again, that's do more of what you're supposed to be doing, everybody. no sort of consideration of why they didn't do it like that, you know, or should I say not documented consideration of why. Review the use of radar vectored approach procedures. No. Radar vectored approach procedures in Polonia Airport from the south, and set the radar rotational speed to the required speed in accordance with ICAO Annex 10. Right, so that's not sort of looked at, you know, there's no sort of investigation, how can I put it, that is not discussed in the investigation report. Why would it make sense for the radar rotational speed not to be set at the correct speed in accordance with ICAO Annex 10? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a good point to this just to really stretch your brains. So ICAO Annex 10, and then set the radar rotational speed to the required speed. So this is a control action. This is somebody's control action. Some real person, real human being needs to set the radar rotational speed to the required speed. So where is that person? Where is the organisation that purpose represents mentioned in the investigation report? You know, so if we're building a control structure and we're looking at radar, that radar system is now a controlled process of some, you know, radar technician or organisation that sets the speeds of the radar, but also is under the influence of ICAO Annex 10. So why is that control path? I mean, I say why is it not considered? I mean, what it is we should consider that. That's one of the things we should look at through the lens of a control structure. So what I'm going to quickly do is I'm going to, see we mentioned there radar RPM 12 seconds. So if you imagine for a minute that between these aircraft there is a radar system, and I think there's a couple of different radars. There's a primary radar, a secondary surveillance radar, and a lot of other things, but it's a radar system. So above that radar system there will be some kind of radar system management organisation of some description that should set that radar system. Can you see that on the screen okay? Is that big enough for you? So I'll use the term configure radar system refresh rate. I think it's sweep rate, spin rate, something like that. Okay, so that's the control action that this is recommending. So let's put that over there like that. There we go, it's out of the way. And above the radar system management is this thing called ICAO Annex 10. Now I'm not familiar with Annex 10, so dare I Google for it. Let's have a look. Annex 10, oh god, it's so complicated. There's so many different things. Which is it? Why can't you just explain? Let's use Sky Brewery. No, let's not use that. So obviously it's big and there's a lot to it. Aeronautical so there's 19 of these things. So there's volume 1, volume 1, volume 2, volume 2, volume 3, volume 2, 2, 2, 3, 3, 3, 3, volume 5, 4, 4, 4, 5, 5, 5, 6. So it's probably this one, volume 5, volume 4, surveillance radar and collision avoidance systems, 5th edition. Right, so that's the newest one. Why is that cheaper than that one then? Right, so this is a bugbear of mine. I'm not going to tear strips off ICAO specifically because a lot of organisations that set standards and provide documentation, the design of the websites is generally so difficult to understand as a beginner, layperson, and even as experts you can get lost. And the EASA, European Aviation Safety Agency website, is also guilty of this. It's really complex with lots of different languages and standards, and it's just not clear which documents are relevant right now that I should be looking at. So as a beginner, I should be able to go to a page with a table of contents or some kind of graphic that says, click this button to get the definitive item. And if you want the others, here's a past history button that you can click on, so you can just go to it instead of being presented with everything and you don't know which is which. You don't know which is current or relevant. So it could be any of these three. I'd like to think it's this one, but it's $67. That one's the more expensive one, so maybe that's the main one. And maybe this one is just the extra information amendment number 91. So you need both of those together. I don't know, but let's just say, for argument's sake, that Annex 10 contains information about how to configure radar systems, and it's a standard that you must follow. It's mandatory, let's assume. So if it's mandatory, then why? Let's put that there. Radar configuration standard. I'm assuming that's what it is. I could probably be completely wrong, but let's assume I am. So we've got this radar system management organization who's supposed to be following Annex 10 apparently. I don't know if it's mandatory. So why was the radar system, the contributory control action, why was that not configured appropriately? Because there might be a genuine reason for it. There might be, maybe it's one of these dangerous successes I always bang on about. It was permitted not to be configured because of some reason that's not discussed or apparently investigated by the report. So our job as, CAST-equipped investigators is to go and ask that question. Well, why was it not configured that way? If it's supposed to be configured that way, what was going on between the ICAO and Annex 10 and finding its, the requirements of it all the way down to the radar system? What's going on there? That's what we should be looking at. That should be the recommendation. So let's just, oh look, I've already got ICAO Annex 10 in my candidate control structure. Look at that, fantastic. So yeah, I've kind of stolen my own thunder from the other day. There we go. Let's put that over there. Let's put ICAO Annex 10 there. Yeah, so maybe the control path for ICAO Annex 10 is through the airport authority. And we've already seen that there are some contributory control actions related to the airport authority that are not looked at in the investigation report. So maybe this is just a common theme. There are things going on above the airport authority that are just not getting through to the frontline operations when they really should be. So as a recommendation, I'd be going and having a look at what's going on there, finding out what is going on. There seems to be a lot of issues there at this airport. I hope that makes sense. I've got a few comments there. We've got Norfolk. Let me just get my mouse and put it over there. Do you tend to group the yellow boxes with their associated function? Yeah, so this is just how can I put it? My personal preference is to have these, both candidate and certain controllers in my model, and then mix it together and refine it over time. And then, of course, look at the overall flow of the control structure to make it into a format that makes it easy to explain to other people, easy to, communicate to others. And so typically I'll have the control process at the bottom, and then as we move up from the direct controllers to the indirect controllers and then the distant controllers in time and space, I will try to group controllers together or boxes together. So in the case of the stuff I've been doing with planetary protection, where we've been looking at the design of a spacecraft, I typically group the relevant controllers and information and communication feeds together in a block or an area that is common. And then, of course, where they have common controllers or common management, common leadership, I'll represent them in a box that stretches across the screen. Because, of course, these are just jigsaw pieces at the moment. And, of course, when I come to make it into a nice looking, refined control structure model, I am going to change the size of some of these boxes and arrange them in a form that makes it look nice, but also makes it straightforward to communicate and understand. Because one of the things with these models is you don't want your audience to just have their brains blown out with a massive, complicated control structure model. It really doesn't help. So you've got to think about the audience. But of course, what would help the audience, the style and layout of a control structure that would help the audience, is not necessarily convenient or suitable for you as the analyst, the modeler, or as part of your team to be able to capture this, capture your progress, uncovering what this control structure looks like, and then of course the progress of your analysis. It does go through divergent and convergent, building and trimming many times before you come to what is essentially a finished picture, a finished model that's suitable for the audience. There are various ways to do this and manage your models. And of course, it's always work in progress until you stick it in the final report. So don't be scared to include too much, but likewise try not to include literally everything, because you'll get lost and your teammates will hate you because it's so complicated. And when you start moving things around and changing things, of course your teammates will lose that link between what they remember and what's in the model. So model management is a critical skill, so to speak. Does that answer your question, Northall? If not, please ask some more questions. And if you want to have a conversation on the phone, please let me know. I do particularly like your picture. You've got a Nimrod. It looks like an XV. It looks like a Nimrod MR2, or is it a MRA4? Let's just have a look at the picture a little bit closer so I can see. It is an MR2. Yeah, fantastic. One of my favourite aeroplanes, the MR2. Got quite a bit of history with the Nimrod, which I won't go into today, but yeah, fantastic. So thank you for that question. Okay, so I banged on about radar systems and Annex 10. So that is a recommendation. They need to review the use of radar vectored approaches and set the radar rotational speed to the required speed in accordance with Annex 10. I would say that should be investigated even further, personally, not just you need to correct these actions. I want to know why that was like that. Northall says, yes, thank you, MR2, fantastic, great aeroplane. Right, so install a minimum safe altitude warning system and other safety devices for ATS Medan. Okay, so it says to install those things. Why were they not present in the first place? Why has it taken a fatal accident for them to decide, actually, that's probably a good idea? Why wasn't it already considered? And playing devil's advocate, maybe they had a safety assessment that said, hey, we need a minimum safe altitude warning system and other safety warning devices for our ATC at this airport. But when that demand was placed with senior leadership, maybe they said no. Or maybe literally next week after this accident, they were going to install one. I'm being a bit facetious there, but for me, that's what the investigation should be looking at. It should be looking a bit deeper than just, hey, you might want to install these safety features. Well, okay, why were they not there in the first place? So let's just bang on about that. MSAWS plus other safety warning devices. I'm going to use a different colour on that. I'm going to make it grey. And I'm going to put a dotted line for the border. And I'm going to make that grey as well. I'm going to make it lighter. Because obviously it wasn't there, so it shouldn't be in the control structure because it wasn't there. It's work as done versus work as imagined. But I'm going to stick it in here just for the sake of saying, well, hang on, they've recommended it should be there. If they recommend it should be there because they think it'll benefit, why was it not already considered for inclusion? Was it considered for inclusion, but for some reason they didn't do it? Why was that? What was the reason for that? Okay, so I banged on about that. Let's have a look. Number 5, consider the construction of a parallel taxiway at Polonia Airport to enable a more practical one-way system of takeoff and landings in order to meet ATS objective for safe and efficient air traffic operation. Okay, there's not really much I can say about that apart from why didn't they already consider that? In fact, let me capture those questions because I'll lose the plot. Why were MES-AWS and other safety warning devices for ATC, ATS not already installed? Why was there no full parallel taxiway at Polonia Airport? Why was there not already a full parallel taxiway at Polonia Airport? Because there may be some very genuine reasons why that was. I think it kind of distracts a little bit away from the main reason this accident occurred, and that is, related to air traffic control and aircraft control, flight path control. But that could be a contributor to other accidents or potential near misses. Okay, so ensure the approval of training programs considers the program published by the manufacturer which has been approved by its authority. Program published by the manufacturer. Right, so approval of training programs. So who does the approval of training programs? So let's put a logical controller in there. So pilot training program management. So what were they thinking with regards to these training programs and the decisions? Did they consider the program published by the manufacturer? If not, why not? Why did it make sense for them to behave the way that they did? Again, that for me, that is a hot topic that should be explored using the control structure model. And I know in the case of the 737 MAX, I know a little bit where they tried to certify it as essentially a new, not very different version of the previous 737. And of course the training and conversion training and everything else was designed to be smaller and shorter, and they missed out with hindsight, key information about the MCAS. Now I don't think that was an airline making those decisions. I think that was Boeing itself. But it's a similar sort of thing. Who or what is that organisation making those decisions, and why is it justifiable? How does it fit into the safety assessment, the safety case, so to speak? They won't have a formal safety case with civil air transport, but you know what I mean. Right, revise the procedure with a regulation that requires airport authority to close its airport when the weather is below minima. So this is interesting because when that standard is mentioned, where is it? Where is it? So that one, there we go. Yeah. So this SCEP 079 1996, runway may be closed, and that came from the Indonesian government, the Director General of Air Communications. So why was it may? Why did it make sense for it to be may? And is there an implied trust that the airport authority across, all the different airports across the countries, their airport authorities will behave in a risk, in a respective risk mindset, as in we've got visibility. The government procedure is saying 800 meters. We've got 500 meters. We should probably close. We should probably close the airfield. Why is that not investigated? So what is the control structure around those airport decisions? And again, they've said, well, we need to change this from a may to a you must. So that is, again, the decision making by the Indonesian government. Why did it make sense to treat it as a may and not a must? What is the decision making behind that? And of course, there's a broader topic there. Are there any other regulations that say may, that within the hindsight of this accident actually now should be must? Or maybe it's a case of, well, there's, 10 regulations that say may. Let's go and talk to the airport authorities across the territory. How do they treat this? What does their procedures say? Are they closing it when they should be? or are they also operating with higher risk as this airport was? So again, there's sort of a double loop learning there, so to speak, to think about. So let's get back over here then. So let's why was SCEP version number SCEP /07/I/1996 not already set as mandatory? And also, how are other airport operators behaving? Because I understand in this accident the smoke affected a significant part of the country, so I imagine that that's more than one airport. So what are the other airports doing? And again, some of these, some of the things I'm saying, at the time they may have already done this work, but just not written about it in the report. So please don't think I'm tearing shreds out of these investigators and the work that they did. So and what other regulations, standards it's not require, is it? What's it called? May. What other standards are may instead of must that might present safety issues? There we go. Okay, right, what else have we got? So we've got a few more to go, not many now. I'll just check the chat, see if there's any more questions. As I say, if you've got any questions, please stick them in the chat and we'll get to them. I'm just going to have a quick drink. Fantastic. So, ensure that radar vectoring procedure at airports. Radar vectoring procedure, have we got that? Minimum vectoring altitude chart. Altitude monitoring procedure. All right, let's put that in. I think I might have got it elsewhere, but I'm going to stick it on here so I don't forget. Radar vectoring procedure. Vectoring, that's not it, is it? At airports where radar service is provided shall be approved by authority. Oh, this is an interesting one, everybody. Right, so this suggests that, where is it? Let's just set this procedure for a minute. Let's put it there. Let's steal the air traffic controller over here. Let's put that one over here like that. I'll zoom in so you can see. So I'm just building a quick control structure model. So there's a vectoring procedure. Just ignore that. It's not a controller. It's just there for convenience. For those that are really specific about building models, that's just there for convenience. It's not a controller. Radar vectoring procedure, radar controller, and then we've got the airport authority. Let's put them down there like that. And then the airport authority. Right, so is it airport authority or is it some kind of government, government ATC regulatory authority? Right, let's just steal some of these arrows, make it look make sense. So we've got a radar controller controlling the airspace. They receive information back from the airspace as feedback. In fact, let's just make this box a bit smaller. There we go. So the radar controller provides control action to aircraft in the airspace. And of course, if they do that, badly, that's going to contribute to accidents, whether it's controlled flight into terrain or obstacles or mid-air collision potentially. So, it's really important. Now, of course, they're going to have this procedure, which is not a controller, so just ignore that. It's not a controller, everybody. And of course that airport authority should, in theory, have set that radar vectoring procedure. But they should also be checking whether that procedure is adequate or not. There should be some kind of feedback to make sure that the procedure is good. And then of course, perhaps, they should also be getting feedback from the air traffic controllers themselves to say, hey, how's this procedure going? You know, is it actually working for you, or is it difficult to use, or is it dangerous? Have you had some near misses? So there's that feedback path. And then, of course, there's the regulatory agency. So they should be saying, hey, these are the kind of things that you should be doing as an airport ATC authority. And we want, you know, some kind of feedback. Maybe they do an audit of some description. But, of course, they might also independently, perhaps, review the procedure itself. So let's just build this model quickly so you can see. Oh no, that's the wrong way around, isn't it? I should have asked you to spot the deliberate mistake then, but there we go. So let's just make these arrows vertical so it's a bit more pretty on the eyes. You know what I said earlier on about the modelling? It's a good idea to make it look good because it's less effort on the brain, less effort on the cognitive system of the audience. If you make it look nice and simple and clear, you know, if it's untidy, it does make it more difficult to understand. So, oh, there we go. So like that. So now again, the regulator, they might also have some kind of feedback about the actual conduct of flights. So they might have some kind of feedback from the actual airspace. Maybe they monitor the airspace. Maybe they get feedback either directly or indirectly from the airport authority. So I'm sort of hoping you can see, just from building a quick dirty control structure model like this, the topic of radar vectoring procedures, I'll just make that a different colour so that people don't get upset that it's not a controller. The radar controller controls the aircraft in the airspace. They're supposed to use a radar vectoring procedure. That airport authority should provide a safe procedure, an appropriate procedure, and they should assure that that procedure is appropriate. And then again, they should also get information back from the radar controller. In fact, actually, there's a missing feedback loop. Can anyone guess where it's supposed to be? I'm just about to draw it. Here we go, look. Oh, broken. Making my models look a mess. Oh, it's so annoying. There we go. What about the airport authority? Maybe they've got direct feedback about the airspace. Maybe they're monitoring what the radar controller is doing. So yeah, so from that one little thing, we're able to build a model and start asking some very detailed questions without knowing the detail of what's inside these controllers. I hope that sort of makes sense and is giving you some ideas. I mean, stick it in the chat. What sort of ideas has this spawned in you? What do you think to that? So yeah, radar vectoring procedure at airports where radar service is provided shall be approved by the authority. So the procedure being approved by the authority is this control action here. So this is approve procedure. But of course, for them to be able to approve this procedure, they've got to have visibility procedure for review. There we go. And they will create the procedure. I can't spell. There we go. There we go. Does that make sense? Is that sort of clear enough on the screen for you? Because I mean, that's just I don't know that much about air traffic control and operations. I'm just showing you the logic of what a basic control structure might look like and how you would go about building it in the context of a procedure. And I'm sure in all the organisations of everybody who's watching this, you're going to have some procedures and guidance. And I'm hoping you can see that, you know, this model is essentially user, leadership, oversight, Does that make sense? Yeah. Oh, yeah, so control process is the activity. Yeah, there we go. So what I'm going to do is copy and paste that, and I'm going to undo all those weird and wonderful changes I just made. And I'll put it at the side so it's a more generic version. There we go. Anyway, right, let's keep moving. So number 9, avoid using similar flight numbers for scheduled flights. I mean, that is kind of obvious, goes without saying. So why were they using similar flight numbers? Why were similar flight numbers permitted and this is for scheduled flights, by the way. So scheduled flights along the same ATS route and in the same area. So I know for a fact that that type of hazard is recognised certainly in the UK and Europe, and there's a lot of very smart people doing a lot of smart work to try and minimise the potential for that happening. Now, of course, it's given the complexity of the air traffic management system and all the different moving parts and all the different airlines and all that kind of stuff. It is challenging, but they do a really, really fantastic job at it. So the question is, why didn't this organisation, what were they doing about that hazard? Was it known to them? Did they recognise it as a hazard? And if so, why did their mitigations not work? Or was it not, is it because there was only 37 air traffic controllers or however many instead of 60? Maybe that wasn't managed properly because they didn't have enough staff. So, we're all sort of going back to the big question. The main question is, what does the control structure look like in relation to this particular topic? And why was it inadequate in managing and controlling that hazard or the response to it? We don't know. That's what the investigation should find out. Okay, fantastic. Review the ATC manpower planning for Medan ATS unit. Okay, so let's have a look. ATC manpower planning. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to here and I'm going to put ATC personnel planning, and I'm going to put it, let's just move that out of the way. I'm going to put it there. So personnel level setting, resource allocation, and then we're going to have feedback, which is, I'll just stretch this a little bit, let's move that out of the way. Oh, that's what I should have done earlier on. It looks a lot smarter if I do it like that. There we go. Right, so ATC personnel planning, personnel level setting, resource allocation, and then this is personnel level requirement. In fact, actually that requirement should come from where would that come from? Air traffic control operations or from the leadership of the radar control? Yeah, I think there's another layer between there and there. So there's an air traffic control operations, but there will be some kind of leadership. And I think the leadership is it this one? No, this one. Air traffic service division, I think, at that level of abstraction. Yeah, so there's the chief air traffic services division, and then the air traffic controllers, watch supervisor, and air traffic assistant. So it's around this level in the organisation that those questions need to be asked. So yeah, what is the demand personal level requirement? And then, of course, what is the personnel level setting and resource allocation? I mean, that's just a very basic loop, but I'm hoping it sort of gets the point across. Right, so reinforce training program on emergency phraseologies as well as standard phraseologies in accordance with ICAO guidelines. So again, when we're saying reinforce the training program, that's not really getting to the point of why they weren't suitable in the first place. So let's put that ATC training program management. There we go. So, and that ICAO doc 4444, isn't it? So let's just put that over there. ICAO doc 4444 for standard phraseology. And that should go to the ATC, yeah, let me just, so that's ICAO doc 4444, which sets the standard for phraseology. And then, of course, ATC training management. Why wasn't that phraseology passed down? Why wasn't, feedback from the capability of the crews? The ATC controllers dealt with big questions there. Okay, what else? So we've got ensure the implementation of ongoing and recurrent training program for all air traffic services officers, especially by using the simulator for emergency and unusual situation procedures and phraseologies. So I'm guessing that there wasn't one implemented, so why was that? Why was ongoing and recurrent training program for all ATS officers not apparently provided effective not apparently provided or effective. Yeah. Okay. Fantastic. Right. So one of the observations, actually, if you write reports like this, one of the things I'd recommend is if you're going to use CAST, use STAMP, I'd recommend using and structuring your report based on the controllers that you have in your control structure model. So, for example, this recommendations section, I know this is very quick and basic, and I'm not taking that away from it, but it would really help to have these recommendations sort of grouped by, are there any issues with the physical process? Were there any physical failures? In this case, it was about visibility, weather conditions. Perhaps you could talk about those findings in that. Then, of course, there's the controllers and their control actions and discussing that and recommendations associated with it. And then, of course, the overall structure. So what structural aspects have been identified as part of this that we should discuss and have recommendations for? Now, of course, it make your report a bit more complicated, but I think it would make it more clearer for people to understand how these issues relate to each other and avoid the potential for missing important things. So ensure that GPWS functional and operational checks are performed in accordance with the maintenance system. So we talked about this earlier, didn't we? GPWS. Yeah, should consideration be given to the control loop for GPWS? What is the control structure for providing the GPWS operational check? What about autopilot aspects? Yeah, because we didn't really talk about that, did we? There we go. Right. So last one, everybody. Ensure that the GPWS functional check be classified as mandatory if the service bulletin has not been completed. Okay. So that's interesting. So there is a question over the maintenance organisation, and I've not put that in the control structure yet. I probably should include it. Where would we stick it? We need to stick it under the airline, don't we? So that's the so that's the aircraft side of the control structure. And then we've got the airline side of the control structure. So there's the engineering directorate. Presumably they're responsible for maintenance of the aircraft. So, you know, what are the control actions and feedback around GPWS and autopilot related aspects? So why was that functional check apparently not done or not documented? And how can we address that? Yeah, okay, so we can do that. And then again, if the service bulletin has not been applied, so if we're looking at the control loop for that maintenance organisation, the service bulletin, is it applied or not? And that should affect their control actions. So how are they managing service bulletins? And again, that could be, it could be, you know, fortuitously or not, should I say, that's inappropriate, but this might be just one isolated issue with this one aircraft. Or it could be it's a fleet-wide issue. You know, from a safety management system perspective, this could represent one instance of a common theme that should be explored and considered. So yeah, that's it. I think we're there, everybody. I think that is everything. I must say I am sort of a bit surprised at how much we've actually got out of this, because when I read the sort of description and watched one of the videos I was provided with, it just sounds really sort of straightforward. Well, you know, yeah, it was bad weather. Yes, there was a bit of an air traffic control confusion. Yes, the pilots didn't really maintain or monitor their altitude, and then we have a disaster. But when you start looking at it through the lens of a control structure, there's quite a few other themes that are not, you know, as the report says, covered by the probable cause. There's so many other potential questions and indicators of potential systematic issues. So yeah, I hope that has been helpful. This is 5 live streams, probably, I don't know, 10, 11 odd hours of talking and listening to me. I'm assuming you can watch it at double speed if you want to get through it fast. But yeah, as I say, this is in support of a Cranfield University course. If you have any questions about that, please contact the organisers. If you have any general questions, or if you want help with STAMP, STPA or CAST, please get in touch. You can either send me a message on LinkedIn or go to visit my website. And of course, if you want to meet in person, I am going to be speaking next week at the Safety Critical Systems Club event, which this year has been held in York. York is a fantastic city. Of course, I would say that because I'm a Yorkshireman, but yes, if you are in York, it'd be great to see you and have a conversation and chat. There's going to be a lot of great presentations going on, a lot of great talks. I always enjoy going to these events because you meet the sort of community and, you know, build up some friends and colleagues. So it's going to be great to be there and see everybody. But I will be speaking on the Tuesday, the 10th of February, and I'll be talking about addressing complexity using STAMP control structure models, and specifically STPA. But I'm sure from what you've seen today and seen in the previous live streams and the videos on my YouTube channel, you'll see that STAMP, the concept of STAMP and the principles that it's based on, can be applied to any kind of system, whether it's really, really, you know, big and complex or relatively straightforward. But of course, the more complex and difficult the system is, the more fantastic the results are. So yeah, that's the end. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you on the next session, or see you next week. Take care.